We're talking episode 6 of HBO's Lovecraft Country, Meet Me in Daegu, where we take a trip down memory lane and we finally meet Gia and her relationship with Atticus. And let's just say the future isn't looking bright for our main star Atticus. We're going to talk about that and much more. Episode 6 of Lovecraft Country was titled Meet Me in Daegu. In the thorns of the Korean War, nursing student Gia crosses paths with Atticus, who has no recollection of their first encounter. Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. Elliot back again with my weekly review, recap, and breakdown of the latest episode of HBO's Lovecraft Country, episode 6, titled Meet Me in Daegu. A very interesting episode. Very excited to talk about it with you all in this spoiler discussion. Before we dive into it, as you can see on the screen now, make sure you're following me on all my other social media accounts. That way you can stay up to date with what's going on over here at Movie Files. If you are new to this channel, welcome. Definitely subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of my Lovecraft Country reviews, other TV reviews, movie reviews, live streams, and all the fun things we do on this very channel. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Really helps out the channel, guys, but I also really appreciate it. And in the comments below, I tell you, I've been saying it all season. I absolutely love reading your comments, your predictions, your theories, your breakdowns of the episode. So definitely continue that momentum. Let me know what you thought of this episode. It was a love story, right? It was definitely a self-contained episode, which I know might turn some people off, but very intrigued to know what you all thought about the hidden messages and all the stuff that you guys point out in these wonderful comments. So definitely comment below. So overall thoughts, Meet Me in Daegu. I'm going to say I enjoyed it. It's very interesting that the even episodes versus the odd episodes, and I'm referring to the numbers of the episode. Episode 2, which was the magic episode. Episode 4, which was the Indiana Jones adventure episode. And this one being more of a love story. They all kind of felt very self-contained in a certain extent, but this one more so than the others. This one, you know, we obviously got some of the story that carried over from the previous 5 episodes, but more so the tick information about him, as we decoded last week, the die and the suffer and all that stuff. What does it mean? Well, he's going to die. And it looks like he's going to suffer in doing so, but not, you know, we didn't get any of the Ruby stuff. We didn't get any of the continuation with that. We didn't get any of the Captain, Lancaster, all that stuff. It was just mostly a flashback. And I would assume this is an important episode because, number one, it tells us about the future of Tick, but also Gia, I think she's going to come back eventually. She's going to maybe help Tick, maybe not. We'll see. But overall thoughts, I enjoyed it, but I would love to know what you all thought about it. So again, comment below. So let's get into this recap here, guys. So we finally get to meet Jamie Chung's character. We've seen her, pop up briefly in the first episode with the whole, space invasion, alien scene. We heard her on the phone a couple episodes, whether it be episode 1 or last week's episode. We've seen her jumping out of a closet. We've seen bits and pieces of her, but now we fully get to see her character full in the flesh. And Gia, man, she is a nursing student and who has more than meets the eye, to say the least. But we see that she's at a movie theater pretending and kind of imagining herself singing and dancing to the musical film that came out in 1944, Meet Me in St. Louis, a very famous and popular Judy Garland movie, which we'll talk about Judy Garland and her kind of similarities to the Gia character, so we'll get to that. But we start that off, and then we briefly see a tagline or kind of a title sequence saying fall of 1949. So this is so crazy how much they pack into these episodes. We got literally a full year's calendar worth of stories in this episode. So we start off in Daegu, South Korea, or Daegu, South Korea, 1949 fall. So we see, she wants to honor her family, right? We see that very early on, and, her family name needs to be honored again, right? And I'm thinking to myself, well, her mom mentions, well, you need to bring home man. I'm like, oh, bring home man. We're in South Korea. This is the episode that we've been waiting for, finding out more about the tragedy, the darkness that Tick learned when he was in the war. So we see again her family, she wants to bring the honor back, and in doing so, she needs to bring home men, but we see that she's learning to be a nurse. She's going to school to be a nurse. So we see that she attempts to find a man by going to, I just call it speed dating. I believe they call it meeting in the show here. And we see that this one guy kind of calls her out for, being so, in fact, being fascinated with the American films and the propaganda within those films. We see that she meets one man who actually likes Judy's films and likes movies in general. But then we see him kind of cross out her name and, I'm thinking to myself, these guys must have like the worst taste in women, because Jamie Chung's character, or just Jamie Chung in general, is such a beautiful woman. All the women in this show has incredible casting. Not only are they incredible actresses, but they're incredibly beautiful. And Jamie Chung is definitely a beautiful woman. And I'm just like, these guys are missing out on the catch. So I thought, before we find out her true nature, to say the least. But as I kind of digress, we go back into it and we see her friend kind of invites her to go to the bar. And, I'm going to bring it up now. She called this friend her best friend. But to me, that her friend was flirting with her. I think she was flat out flirting with her. Let me know what you all thought of that relationship. But nevertheless, we see that she doesn't go to get coffee with them, but instead she brings home a man from a bar. And, this episode was very HBO. There was 3 or 4, 5, 6 sex scenes. There was a lot of nudity going on. So, hey, HBO, you know what to expect. I feel like a Game of Thrones episode, to say the least. But we see that she takes the man home. They proceed to have sex. And, long story short, things get a little interesting, to say the least. We see these hairy tentacles coming out of her body and all over the guy's body, and we see that she is, the visual effects of the show have been beyond impressive, but we see these tentacles coming out of her, and again, I don't know if this was a creature that was in a Lovecraft Country novel before, but I'm familiar with this Kamiho character because I've seen this particular lore and this mythology in other anime films, but I wonder if that is something that was implemented in the Lovecraft story at one point in time. But neither way, we see, the tentacles come out, and we see that, as she's connecting herself to this gentleman, we see him having memories. We see him and his kids. We see him climb a mountain and scream out. I can't remember what he screamed out, but we see that Gian does the same thing. And as she's doing so, as I assume she was climaxing in that moment, he explodes. I'm just like, geez, this is crazy. This is the HBO Lovecraft that I've been loving these last 6 weeks. So we see her mom slowly opens the door and flat out says, 10 more to go. I'm like, oh, so her mom and her have this thing going, and we'll figure that out. Obviously, we find out in this episode, but this is what it means to bring honor to the family, I guess, as we kind of find out. So as we see on the screen, summer of 1950, which, 1950s, man, as we all know, the Jim Crow era, but in this particular show, we're now taking place in the Korean War, which started in June, I believe, of 1950. And like I said, the 1950, that decade alone being the post-World War II boom, the dawn of the Cold War, and, of course, the Civil Rights Movement. So, again, this show has so much historical accuracy within the story, the narrative that they tell. But, we get this interesting scene here where we see this conversation between Gia talking to her mother, and the mother mentions her husband. Now, when Gia refers to the husband, she doesn't say father, and we find out why later on. I thought that was really interesting, but we find out within this conversation that she absorbs the souls of these men, and when she does so, she obtains their memories, and that she only needs 2 more souls, and she'll be able to release herself from these memories and kind of release herself for these victims. So we find out that we get this, that they obtain this power by this Magang, and her mother told her that if she absorbs 100 souls, the Kamiho spirit will leave you and you will become human again. So again, this Kamiho spirit, I've seen an anime with this, with the foxtail and the shape shifting of sorts, and I thought, I'm like, okay, this is really interesting. I'm kind of digging the lore and the mythology and this, again, these different genres that we're getting into. This was a love story / kind of shape shifting type of episode, to say the least. So when they bring up that she needs these souls, I'm like, our boy Tick is going to come into this mix somehow, some way. So as we move forward, again, everything that's going on in the 1950s, we see that there is a lot of stuff going on in the Korean War, especially when it comes to being a communist, and obviously the stuff that's still prominent now over there. But the ideology of economic equality is something that was not, it was frowned upon back then. As we see a man getting hung in the streets and no one's doing anything about it. We see, as we kind of move forward, we see that she has another victim that she brings into the mix, and again, she refers to the husband, your husband. She says that again, but she says this time around, she says her father, and we find out that her father loved her, but not in the way that you would think. It was more of an inappropriate way of loving her. As we find out, the mother summoned this Magang sorcerer to kill the monster, aka her husband, aka Gia's father. As we kind of learn within this scene, in some weird way, the mother summoned this creature to kill a monster, but also to gain her daughter back, to gain her innocence back, more per se. Because what we find out in this scene, which was just heartbreaking, we learn that Gia, number one, she isn't Gia anymore. She is this soul. She's this Kamiho. That's inside of her. The Gia is no longer present in this body. We see Gia start singing this song about butterflies, which tie into this overall theme of metamorphosis and changing yourself and blossoming to the person you're supposed to be. So there's a lot of that going on within this season, especially in these last 2 episodes. But we see, Gia snaps at her mother and tells her that, she was raped by her father. That was the inappropriate love that she was referring to. We learned that the song that she was singing was not learned from her. She wasn't taught by her mother, but yet this was just like a coping mechanism whenever she was taken advantage of by her father. We find out that her father, picked her mother because she was weak and she knew what was going on. So that was just like, man, that was dark. That was heartbreaking to see that kind of relationship that they had. And again, that the mother seek this spirit, this monster, to kill this one monster, but in doing so, she lost her daughter. So very tragic stuff going on, to say the least. So as we move forward, we get this really intense scene where, Gia and her crew of other nurses are taken to this field. They get questioned about passing on intel to the communists and being a spy, and we see this woman get shot point blank in her head, and they want to get the truth. We see the army guy runs out of bullets and calls someone to come up, and that someone is our hero, Tick. So now we finally get to see Atticus in his darkest moments. We get to see what he learned at the war, which was just killing people to get information, just taking orders, as he says later in the episode. And, just kind of a side note, we've seen Tick kind of go dark last week when he beat up his dad and having some moments of getting in the dark space, but not like this. Like, I didn't recognize Tick. And that just kind of brings me to, again, this is a side note. Earlier this week, as I'm recording this a couple days ago, we found out, it hasn't been confirmed by Marvel, but our boy Jonathan Majors has been casted potentially in the Ant-Man 3 film as Kang the Conqueror, who, for my comic book fans out there, is a very prominent villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and in the Marvel comics. He's a villain. So I'm like, oh, man, we get to see, we're so used to seeing Jonathan play a good guy, a charming guy, but now he's playing a villain, and we haven't seen that yet until this episode. Like, again, when he shot that woman in the head and we saw him just kind of blank face and just didn't care, I'm like, oh, he can, we all know he's a fantastic actor, but he can get to that darker side. And I kind of was like, okay, I see you, Jonathan. But as we move forward, we also we see that the spirit doesn't know love. She doesn't know any emotions, right? We see that earlier when she's talking to her mother, but in that moment when her friend gets taken and ultimately killed, as we find out, that hurt her. That was emotional. That's when we're starting to see that the spirit has more. She's not a monster. There's more to the spirit than just being a monster. She loves, she cares for people, as we saw in that scene. So as we kind of move forward, we see yet again on the screen fall of 1950. So we got a full calendar year's worth of information this episode. So we move forward. We see Gia, she spots Tick at the nurse. He's injured. He seems to be, he's harmed himself, and he seems, she sees that and she wants to kill him, as she alludes to later on. But we see Tick attempting to read, and that's when I'm like, okay, that's the Tick I know. He puts on his glasses, and that's the Tick I know, right? This is the nerdy, hero Tick, besides the dark and evil Tick that kills people and taking orders. But he's trying to read this book, but he can't read the book because his eyes all banged up. He's clearly in pain, but he's also, in this scene, I think he's kind of reflecting on the war and the stuff he's done so far, killing people and just doing the orders, just doing what has been told him to do. So I think that kind of got to Tick at this point. But as we kind of move forward, we see Gia agrees to kind of take one last soul, and she mentions to her mom that soul is going to be a soldier in the hospital, aka our boy Tick. As we move forward, we see Gia makes her plans to kind of lure Tick to kind of get on his good side. We see that she's helping him out, making his bed. We see Tick is reading the count of Monte Cristo, which is a great callback to episode 3, and we kind of get the explanation of why Montrose wants that book, kind of feeling impressed, and all the different stuff of that book, the novel has to say, and the connection with Monte and that character in the novel. We see that Tick learns that Gia and him and they have some things in common. They like to escape the reality, right? We know that Tick reads books to escape reality, and we know that Gia likes to go to the movie theaters to escape her reality. everything that she has going on. So they have that connection there. And we see, Tick and a friend of his tell Gia their experience of being minorities in America, and that they're fighting this war for a country that doesn't care for them, as we saw earlier this year in the Five Bloods, and obviously as history tells itself back in the day. But we see how their experience is in the war and why they joined the war, and particularly why Tick joined the war. We really never learned why he volunteered, which we find out in the scene, to escape everything in America and to feel like he's a part of something, right? So that was a really good character moment for Tick. And we see Gia might be looking at Tick a little bit differently. Her intentions were initially just to kill this man, but she sees he has more than meets the eye, very similar to her, right? A lot of connections between those two characters. So we see they share a really quiet, intimate moment, talking about their fear, and that their fear shouldn't shape them. This was a quote that Gia's friend that was killed and kidnapped by Tick quoted. And once he kind of says, I wish I could meet your friend, was like, you met her and you got her killed. And that kind of got Gia back in her mindset, like, okay, I got to go back to my initial plan, which is kill him, take his soul, and all that stuff. So we see Gia visits Tick at his military base, and we see that one of Tick's friends comes to meet her, and I'm thinking, like, is something going to happen? Are they going to take advantage of her? But no, we see the hopeless romantic Tick has a movie night set up for the two, and he mentions Uncle George briefly, which I thought, like, oh, Uncle George, little shout out there. But we see that they're watching yet again another Judy Garland film and a Gene Kelly film, the 1950 summer stock film, and they kiss. And again, the whole Judy influence in this episode is very critical to Gia's character, because if you guys aren't too familiar with Julie Gardner, a fantastic actress, she died at a very young age, at the age of 47, if I'm not mistaken, and she was thrust into Hollywood very early in her career. You might have seen some of her films, such as Wizard of Oz, and The Star is Born, and a lot of the films they showed in this episode. She was a Hollywood star, and Hollywood took her life, unfortunately, with drugs and all this stuff. And like I said, she died at a very young age. So I think the comparisons here between Gia and Judy Garland is just, again, people wanting Gia to be this monster and to do these duties from her mother for she can get her daughter back. Similar to Judy, right? She was pushed into Hollywood to entertain these people, and we saw what that did to her. So I think I like the comparisons that the show is trying to do there. So we see that she takes Tick to her lair, to say the least, and we've seen this before, right? And we learned that Tick is a virgin, which I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting, because Letty was a virgin, and all that tie-in or whatever the case would be. But we see, she tells him that he tells her that he's never felt that way about a woman, as he told, Letty last week. And we see, they start to get it on, and Gia tells him to get away. She says, run away, because we see that the monster, the communal creature, the spirit, is coming out of her. So, she's getting feelings for Tick. She's starting to fall for Tick. And again, this episode, we're seeing that monster, her being deemed a monster. She has feelings. She has love for other people, as we see within this scene. We see Gia tell her mother that she once didn't have feelings, but she learned to grow feelings, to have feelings for people like her best friend and some of the people that she killed. But more particularly, she's falling for Tick. Her mother calls her a monster for feeling for the man that killed her best friend, and spits in her face, and just doesn't like the decisions that her daughter, aka Kamito Spirit, is doing. So we see Gia confronts Tick and ultimately tells him, you took my best friend. You murdered my best friend, and my intentions were to kill you. And we see within this conversation that she tells him, even though that was my plans, you ultimately saved me within this. They have another conversation about how the war has torn Tick apart. He's a different person because of the war, and we know that as an audience member. And we also see that that she mentions we need to be more than what we're thought of, right? You are more than a soldier that just takes orders, and a black man in America. Gia, I'm more than this. We don't know. He doesn't know it, but I'm more than the monster that my mother calls me. I'm more than the spirit that I've been deemed upon. So they definitely, like I said, they have a lot in common, to say the least. So as we see yet again another sex scene, which again, this is. I hope your kids were, for those parents at home, the kids were in bed, because there's a lot of hot and sexy stuff going on in this episode, to say the least. So this time around, no hairy tentacles. It's just regular sex. No monster coming out. But again, our boy Tick, it was his first time, and he pulls another bathroom scene where he wasn't able to last that long, to say the least, but he makes up for it later on, as we all know in this episode, because there's a lot of sexy scenes. But neither way, we see Tick tells her mother that she loves, or we see Gia tells her mother she loves Tick, and she calls her a whore and tells her that you can't love anyone, and this, that, and the third. So her mother is just, despite all the stuff that Camino, this creature, is doing. We see on the screen winter of 1950, again, full circle from when we first saw Gia for the first time. But now we're now in the love story, right? We see Tick and Gia laughing, playing in the snow. Again, a very Judy Garland type of love story going on here. And we see her tell him the story of the Kamiho spirit and the legend, the lore, the mythology of that folklore. We see Tick tells her that he can go home. He's got enough points to go home, and he can choose to stay, and they have a little moment there. She's like, I can't ask you to stay. And again, romantic, lovey-dovey. It leads to a sex scene. And in this sex scene, though, very different than the others, Gia lets the cat out of the bag, to say the least. We see the spirit comes out and all the tentacles and everything, and it attaches itself to the Tick's soul. Now, this is a very, very interesting scene here, guys. So as we break it down, we see that the Camille spirit goes into Tick, connects itself to Tick, and we see the memories. We see the flashback. We see a flashback of him, playing, I think, with his kite with his mother, Dora. We see him reading a book. We see him getting whooped by his dad, Montrose. But then we also see him torturing the best friend. We see that darker side yet again in Tick, that he had part in her torturing and her ultimately being killed. But here is where things get very, very interesting. Now, comment below, were some of these scenes that I'm going to mention here, some of them in the past, or was this all in the future? So in this moment here, we see him sleeping with another woman. Again, is that him lying about being a virgin? Is that him having sex in the past? Is that in the future? Do we know that? We see a brief scene of Letty. We see him leaving Chicago. We see him getting baptized. Again, which scenes were in the past, which scenes were in the future, but in particular, we get this scene here, which we see him kind of strapped up to something, and he ultimately dies. So that definitely hints at episode 1, where Gia called and said, you should have went back home, as she says to him in this scene, as he's clearly freaking out at this point after seeing, him, the memories that he saw, and obviously the tentacles coming out of her. So Tick obviously runs out of the place, and Gia is crying. And for the first time this episode, her mother confronts, is comforting her. But again, guys, let me know that scene. Again, we see Tick dies, but him sleeping with a woman, is that him and Letty breaking up, him leaving Chicago, him getting baptized? Maybe he goes back to Florida. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. So as we kind of move forward and wrap up this recap, we see Gia goes back to the McGain character, the sorcerer. We see the fox in the background. We see her mother tells, in exchange for our broken promise, we need to get some information about a man's death, aka Tick. And we see, as the scene kind of plays out, Tick, she asks him, will Tick die? And she simply says, you have not even become one with the darkness yet. And then she also proceeds to say, you will see countless deaths before your journey is done. End of the episode. Now, was the McGain sorcerer talking about Gia? She's yet to step into the darkness? She's yet to see this, death toll rally up? Or was she referring to Tick? Tick is yet to step into the darkness. Tick is yet to see the death that's going to come ahead. So which character do you think that the McGain character was referring to in the final moment? So again, what questions do we have left? Again, the biggest thing for me was the Tick stuff, sleeping with the woman, leaving Chicago, getting baptized, in the past or in the future? And then how does Tick die? Will things change? Will the prophecy play out? Will we unfortunately see Atticus die in our very, the finale of the show? Or again, there's some rumblings about time travel. We haven't yet to come back to Hippolyta and Diana and that Ori, object. Will they use that to their advantage to either bring back, Uncle George, to go into the past, to go into the future? Who knows, guys? Next week's episode 7, is titled I Am. I don't watch the previews for the previous week, so I don't know what's to come, but I will be back to see what's going to happen next week. Again, this show has just been such a journey for me. I love the story, the narrative, the characters, the actors, the performances, the through lines, the themes, everything that this show has to offer. Again, this episode just about embracing yourself, right? Being called the monster, but being more than just that. Being a soldier and being more than just that. Having feelings, having emotion, having love, having this metamorphosis, becoming the person you want to be. I love the themes in this show, and I just thought that this was a really good episode. I didn't love it, like I said, but I really enjoyed it, and I'm so excited to see what's to come next. So as always, guys, make sure to like this video, give it a thumbs up, share this video to all the Lovecraft Country fans out there. Make sure, again, to comment below your pros, your cons for this episode, your theories, your prediction for the next week's episode and the week after that, and into the finale. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of my content. This week alone, I had a couple Lovecraft Country non-review videos I did this week. I did a top 5 moments for the first half of the season, so check out that video if you didn't get a chance to. And then I'm pre-recording this on Thursday, so this coming Saturday, I have a scheduled live stream for just a Lovecraft Country open discussion with some special guests, so check out that video. And then I did reviews for The Devil All the Time, Enola Holmes. What else did I do this week? Antebellum. Did some TV reviews for Raised by Wolves on HBO Max. Did a Ted Lasso review that I've been doing these last 7 weeks. Did a, The Boys review. So again, guys, hit that bell because this is like its own streaming service here at Movie File. So I hope you all are enjoying the content. I thank you guys for the continued support, not only on these Lovecraft Country reviews, but just all the stuff that you guys watch on my channel. It means so much to me that you guys enjoy the content. I enjoy that you enjoy it. I love your comments. I love the community that we're building, and I can't thank you guys enough. So again, like, share, comment, subscribe, hit that bell. Thank you all for watching this review. Have a fantastic week. Hope you're staying safe, and we'll see you on the next video.